This is BBC One, handing over for night duty to BBC News 24.
You're watching BBC News. The United Nations has condemned Iraq's decision to suspend cooperation with weapons inspection teams as totally unacceptable. But the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan suggested the later dispute could be resolved without using force. He said it was a time for a reassessment of how the international community dealt with Iraq.
At the United Nations tonight, there's a feeling the world has been here before. The script is the same, and so are the actors. A defiant Iraq and an angry United States.
Iraq's continued violation of Security Council resolutions means that once again they're defying the world. They're defying the United Nations. They're defying the Secretary General. They're defying their own allies on the Security Council. This is not going to stand.
A short time ago, the United Nations Security Council gave Saddam Hussein a slap on the wrist. It said his decision to stop cooperating with UN weapons inspectors was totally unacceptable. But this evening, the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan sounded a conciliatory note. He said the Iraqi position is not closed. He called for a much closer dialogue with Baghdad on how it can get sanctions lifted. Military action, according to Mr. Annan, is not on the cards.
Today the Council came out with a unanimous decision, and I think that determination, I hope that determination of the Council to see the task through will help us along, but I don't think we'll necessarily need military forces.
Of course, America could yet punish Iraq with cruise missile attacks and airstrikes, as it has done in the past. But apart from Britain, there would be little international support for that. On the Security Council, China, Russia and France would almost certainly oppose such a use of force, as would most of the Arab world. In Baghdad today, UN weapons officials were allowed to work, but the Iraqis have said they will no longer permit what they call intrusive inspections of suspected weapons sites. If and when the officials are blocked, it will escalate the current tension even further. But it now looks as though the United Nations Secretary-General may play the peacemaker once again to defuse this crisis, just as he did 6 months ago. Ben Brown, BBC News.
Well, a little earlier I spoke to our correspondent at the United Nations, Rob Watson. With Kofi Annan acting very much the peacemaker and the White House taking a tough line, I asked him if divisions were beginning to show.
Well, on the surface, yes, but I think really what we've been seeing is a bit of an Emperor's New Clothes Day at the United Nations, where there's been a great deal of extravagant sound bites, an awful lot of meetings, but essentially absolutely nothing has been decided, either by the Americans, the rest of the members of the Security Council, or indeed the Secretary-General. But yes, the Americans have been talking a tough game, but very pointedly not threatening the use of military action, whereas the Secretary-General has been saying, yes, it's time to talk to Iraq, time to perhaps rethink our whole policy towards Baghdad, provided, of course, that Iraq backs down first.
How long do you think they would be prepared to talk?
Well, I think in the first instance, what the UN has done, in the last few hours is to throw the ball back into Iraq's court, because they've said that the actions are unacceptable and that Baghdad should rethink, and then they might be willing to take a more favourable approach towards Iraq. Now, I think in the short term, the United States and Britain are prepared to go along with that, to go along with the quiet diplomacy, to give talking every opportunity, because the consequences of using military action are very, very grave. They fear, as was pointed out, that it wouldn't have broad international support, and they're also puzzled as to what on earth would happen next once you'd actually bombed Baghdad.
So the sense of cat and mouse continues for the foreseeable future?
Absolutely. There's clearly a sense that the most important players in this game, that is the United States government, the British government, and Iraq's backers, Russia, France and China, I don't think any of them have really have decided what the end game is, how much on the one side the US and Britain are prepared to take a tough line, and how much on the other side Russia, France and China are willing to go in backing Iraq. And I also think that in Baghdad itself, that President Saddam Hussein is almost certainly keeping his options open and hasn't necessarily decided whether to completely tough this one out or to try and make a compromise like in February, which somehow still leaves him slightly further ahead in the game.
Rob Watson speaking earlier from the United Nations. One of the most senior politicians in the Palestinian Authorities, Hana Ashrawi, has resigned. She turned down a post of tourism minister in the new cabinet of the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. In what's being seen as a political and public relations setback to Mr. Arafat, Mrs. Ashrawi says she's leaving because of a failure to deal with alleged corruption inside the Palestinian government.
For most of the 90s, Hana Ashrawi has been a leading worldwide advocate of Palestinian rights. It made her a potent weapon in Yasser Arafat's various public relations battles. But she's become increasingly disillusioned with the alleged corruption in the Palestinian government and the political damage this was doing to the peace process with the Israelis. The decision earlier this week by Yasser Arafat not to remove those implicated in the corruption claims was the final straw. She's now decided to quit.
I've had a very long and candid discussion with President Arafat, and I would like to state very clearly that I'm very grateful and appreciative of his confidence in appointing me once again to his cabinet, and I respectfully declined this appointment because I feel that the whole issue of comprehensive and pervasive reform that is needed is not being met by this new cabinet.